The group had come a long way since their initial setup, and the construction of a multi-analyzer would be a massive step. Of course, to achieve that, they'd need gold and plastile, two materials they'd yet to come across. In order to obtain them, they'd need to launch more scavenging missions outside of the city limits. Their initial journeys had been a success, but they hadn't been able to bring back nearly as many materials as they'd hoped, due to the small capacity of the scavenger. To avoid this happening in the future, Maisie shared plans with the group for a truck she'd designed that could carry a lot of cargo. The truck itself was unarmoured and unarmed, leaving it vulnerable on its own. But with the scavenger to protect it, they'd have the perfect setup. Of course, to build the truck, they'd need steel, which was the one thing they hadn't been able to carry much of during their previous journeys, so they'd need to gather up some more to get the ball rolling. Next suggested that, since it seemed like a number of the group were likely to be spending a fair bit of time away from the complex on scavenging missions, they should improve the defences back home. To this end, she began designing some forward positions near the doors of the complex, looking to utilise Maisie's research into automated turrets to help keep the doors safe, even if there was no one else around to protect them. With no research to do until they could build the multi-analyzer, Maisie was given guard duty, looking out for Nyx while she was outside the complex building the new defences. With the first extension to the defences going up without incident, Nyx was quick to get to work on the next extension, eager to finish up the improvements soon, so that she could feel more comfortable going back out on the road and leaving the others back at the base. With the abundance of chem fuel they had, combined with the infected's annoying ability to always get up unless shot through the head, Nyx suggested relying largely on flamethrower turrets. Not only would this save them some steel from using the gun turrets, but it would also immolate the infected, and thus removing any chance of them getting back up and becoming an issue again. For the time being, they only had enough steel to build a single flamethrower turret, but that should be plenty for the moment. It only really needed to keep any aggressive infected at bay long enough for someone in the complex to get to the defences and deal with the issue themselves. Just as one last little safety measure, Nyx also added an extra set of doors to the newly extended defences, as well as replacing the one remaining wooden door that was still in place, before the flamethrower turret inevitably reduced it to ash. That night, as Nyx was affixing the new doors, the turret showcased its power, protecting Nyx by launching a stream of liquid napalm at an approaching infected, setting it on fire and providing Nyx with plenty of time to escape into the complex. Unfortunately, although it was a robust way to ensure the complete death of the infected, fire wasn't the quickest way to kill them, and the infected made sure to have its final revenge on the group by screaming in agony all through the day. It really was quite an aggravating sound. Not wishing to head out on another trip outside the city until they had the truck, Nyx and Yuso ventured out into the streets once more to liberate more steel for their stockpiles. They loaded up on a mixture of usable steel and steel chunks and dragged them all back to the complex. Igniting the smelter, Yuso got to work liberating the usable steel from the chunks. Although she turned the smelter off at night before going to bed, simply using it during the day had meant the batteries hadn't been able to charge enough during the day to allow the power to stay on all night. It was clear that improving their power supply would need to be top of the list once they managed to collect more steel. With the complex relying heavily on solar power and the days becoming shorter as winter progressed, they would need to be storing as much power as possible during the days in order to ensure that the complex could stay heated through the long winter nights. With the steel from their adventure around the city streets barely making a dent in the truck's construction, it became apparent that they'd need to head out in the scavenger to grab enough to make good progress. And so it was that Nyx and Yuso saddled up again the next morning and set off for a nearby encampment that they'd heard rumours about, hoping to find a large haul of steel for the group. Back at the complex, the new turret wasted no time in showing off its usefulness to the remaining members of the group, whilst also ensuring that they simply wouldn't get a moment's peace all day. Despite the screams of the immolated infected continuing into the night, and the yak seemingly joining in on the chorus of aggravation, Annette and Maisie were able to distract themselves by teaching some new lessons to Jubilee and Connor. Once again, Yuso and Nyx were acting as the spectre of death, approaching the camp at 4 AM in the morning with the thunder of their engine and the cold metal of their hull. The camp appeared to be controlled by the Toxoid rig, a faction of survivors who were immediately hostile to the group. Yuso knew how to deal with them though, and turned the cannon on them in the darkness of the night. The small arms fire from the members of the Toxoid rig did little to deter the scavenger, and it ripped right through a number of them. Feeling it was relatively safe and wanting to investigate further, Nyx and Yuso disembarked and ventured deeper into the camp. They had to deal with one more member of the faction the old-fashioned way. And following this, were forced to aggressively dismantle a turret. After that though, the area seemed secure. What wasn't secure, however, was Yuso's insides, as the turret had managed to land a few shots on her before they took it down. Nyx managed to patch her up though, and they soon got to work dismantling the camp to salvage its materials. It seemed as though the people in the encampment had had some sort of vendetta against the local bears, and had stacked their corpses high in one of the rooms. It really was quite the sight to behold. The camp wasn't overflowing with resources, but with a solar panel, a battery, some steel floors and some steel gibbet cages, they would be able to salvage a nice haul of steel at least. Unfortunately, as the night progressed, Yuso's condition became worse, and it became clear she'd contracted an infection. Perhaps sleeping in the room that was the site of the bear massacre hadn't been the best idea after all. Nyx knew her skills in medicine, combined with the total lack of actual medicine they had, wouldn't be enough to help keep Yuso stable. They managed to pack up the battery, the pemmican, a few components, and a little steel, and then immediately headed back to the city to get Yuso some proper treatment. The ride back was across some rough terrain, but Nyx hauled ass and managed to get them back to the complex by the early evening. Nyx had actually done an okay initial job of treating Yuso's infection, so instead of pestering her immediately, Annette let her sleep for the rest of the night and decided to treat her further in the morning. As Annette went back to bed, wandering past the flickering lights of the complex, it became clear that with the cold weather forcing the heaters to work overtime and the shorter days limiting the daylight hours they had, they would need to reinforce their power grid desperately. She made a note to speak to Nyx in the morning about using some of the new materials they'd returned with to add an extra solar panel to the array. Following some additional treatment the next morning, it looked as though Yuso was in a good position to beat the infection, much to everyone's joy. She would need a little longer in bed, but would likely make a full recovery in time. At the gates, the turret was showing off that it could identify all targets, as it bellowed a stream of flames at a nearby Arctic fox, which clearly looked at the turret the wrong way. With the temperatures dropping overnight to minus 33 degrees, Nyx wasted no time building their new solar panel that morning. And with the increased energy production that allowed, they also installed the new battery they'd recovered from the encampment, to ensure that they could store enough power to see them through the nights. Later that day, Yuso's body did indeed build up a resistance to her infection, and surviving the bullet wounds and infection left Yuso feeling ever more steadfast. With the extra steel from the recent expedition, Annette was able to get back to producing parts for their new truck once again. Still keeping an eye out for gold and plastile for their multi-analyzer, Annette rushed out from the complex to try and trade with some travellers out in the street. Unfortunately, the dangerously low temperatures had forced the travellers out of the city soon after they arrived, leaving Annette running through the streets too slowly to catch up with them. The steel from the expedition had certainly helped, but with the solar panel and an extra heater eating up some of it, they didn't quite have enough to finish off the truck. Determined not to have to leave more steel behind on their next expedition, the group were motivated to collect steel from the city to finish the truck before their next adventure. As such, with Maisie and Yuso as guards, Nyx ventured out to the south of the base to collect up as much steel slag chunks as she could. Once Nyx starts heading back with armfuls of steel, Maisie decides to grab some more, and in the interest of making their return safer, Yuso pops open the garage door in the south wall to give Maisie a quicker path back to safety. They managed to gather up plenty of chunks for Yuso to begin processing the next day. Early the next morning, the group were contacted by another survivor wandering the city who wishes to join their group. Eager to help who they can, and also somewhat selfishly wanting additional help around the complex for when the expedition team are away, the group happily accept, and Shakan joins the group. Shakan is unfortunately a pacifist, so won't be much help on the expeditions, but her cooking skills and intellect will mean she can help keep things moving at the complex whilst the others are away. To make a new room for Shakan, they moved the batteries into a new room and repurposed the battery room into a bedroom, since it was already part of the heat compartment at the north of the complex. Next starts outfitting the new room with a bedside table and a chest of drawers, not wanting to leave their new friend wanting for creature comforts. Unfortunately, building the bedside table and the chest of drawers meant she didn't have enough wood to build a bed afterwards. In the interest of making Shakan's room nicer, they also relocated the fecal sludge storage from the adjoining room into the chem fuel storage area, keeping dangerous items together, and also keeping the fecal sludge closer to the refinery where it was being processed. With no bed options, Nyx decides to create a comfy sleeping bag for Shakan. It's not exactly as good as a bed, but it'll be cozy enough to last her for a while. Although having Shakan sleeping on the floor wasn't enough incentive for the group to leave the complex to cut down some trees, realising that they needed wood for the bed of the new truck was. And so Annette, Nyx and Maisie ventured out to the courtyard of a nearby building to allow Annette to fell some lumber for them. With the lumber secured, Nyx was finally ready to put all the pieces together to create their new truck. Adding the last part, Nyx unveiled the truck to the group in a ceremony where she crowned it the tugboat, on account of the role they had envisioned for it as a hauling device for their expeditions. Eager to put the truck through its paces, the whole group pitch in the next morning, with Nyx and Yuso taking up their usual spots in the scavenger, Annette manning the garage door, Shakan stocking the vehicles with meals and fuel for the trip, and Maisie, since she still didn't have the multi-analyzer to continue her research, hopping in the truck to take it out for a spin. The added benefit of Maisie's participation was that she would finally get to satiate that wanderlust of hers. The expedition team were heading for a mining site that a group of traders had told them about, as it would be the perfect place to load up on steel. It would also give them a chance to test the truck both on and off the road. Arriving in the area of the mining camp, the group weren't reassured when they saw more gibbet cages full of corpses. Yuso readied the gun turret as they approached the encampment, with the truck taking up the rear to keep out of the firing line. Sure enough, a turret soon opened fire on the scavenger. Nyx moved it closer to the mountainside, hoping to cut off the turret's line of sight. As their would-be attackers came rushing out towards them, Yuso opened fire. Eager to help out, Maisie repositioned the tugboat before parking up, hopping out, and, shotgun in hand, letting off some blasts. The attackers weren't very organised and soon fell, leaving only the turret to deal with. Hoping that it would be distracted by the scavenger, Maisie attempted to sneak close enough to get some good shots off, but the turret noticed her approach and turned to train its sights on her. Thankfully she was able to get into some good cover, and between her and the scavenger, they soon took the turret down. With the area secured, Maisie went back to grab the tugboat and move it closer, to make loading it up easier, whilst Nyx and Yuso disembarked and began exploring the encampment. Commandeering the beds of some of the people they'd murdered mere moments earlier, the group settled in to get some sleep, deciding that they could start scavenging the remnants of the camp in the morning. They made a start bright and early the next day, looking to recover as many valuable materials as they could. In their exploration, they also ended up uncovering a room full of angry boar, which immediately charged at Maisie. Thankfully, Nyx and Yuso could easily hear her shrill shrieks of panic, and managed to get out into the field in plenty of time to put the boar down, before they could do any real damage to Maisie. In a stroke of luck, the group realised that someone who'd lived here had thought to inlay their bed with a lot of gold. Ripping it apart, they realised they had more than enough here for the multi-analyzer. They'd still need plastile, but this was a huge step and a massive stroke of luck. Having spent the whole day scavenging, the expedition team decided to sleep here one more night, and the following morning, they packed up their haul. Although they'd only managed to liberate a handful of components, having the truck with them meant that they'd be able to return with a monster haul of steel. With everything loaded up, they began their journey back to the city. Things had been blessedly quiet in the city during their absence. The cold weather meant that the infected hadn't even been bashing on the doors, although the turret would have been able to take care of it if they had. As a result, Annette and Shakan had been able to relax, handle the farming and teaching duties, and get to know each other a little better. Early the next morning, hearing the rumble of the engines, Annette ventured out to open the garage door and welcome the expedition team and their flood of steel back to the complex. Unfortunately, just as the garage door was closing, one of the infected, lured in by the scent of the yak milk, dashed through the closing door and into the courtyard. It didn't seem aggressive, but they had no way to safely corral it out of the courtyard. In a split-second decision, Maisie pulled out her shotgun and took a shot at it, angering the infected. Unfortunately, Maisie hadn't accounted for how close the infected was to little Amelia, and the infected rounded on her as the nearest target and began swinging. Much to everyone's relief, Amelia was able to dodge the infected's first swing, and as the rest of the group had just gotten out of the vehicles, they all unloaded their guns on the infected before it could take a second swing. While Yuso disposed of the body, everyone took the morning to calm their nerves following what could have been a disastrous event. With the abundance of steel that they now had, the group added yet another solar panel to their array, in the hopes that it would mean they'd never have to worry about power again, even in the deepest days of winter. As well as this, they also added additional turrets to the defences. It had always been the plan to have a few turrets, but they'd previously been limited by their steel supplies. Of course, as soon as the group began to feel secure in their power supplies, a moon decided that it was the perfect time to occlude the sun, plunging the whole planet into darkness, and once their batteries ran out, the complex too. With a collective sigh, the group reassured themselves that the eclipse wouldn't last that long, and after that, they'd never need to concern themselves with their power situation again. It wasn't long before the new turrets got a chance to warm their barrels, and the group added the sound of these new turrets to the list of sounds that they would need to get accustomed to in this apocalypse. With Maisie getting more and more antsy about continuing her research, she insisted that they head out on another expedition, hoping to find plastile to allow them to build the multi-analyzer. With winter soon to end and the infected soon to start appearing in greater numbers once again, Nyx figured it was as good a time as any for another expedition, so they hopped in the vehicles and set off once more. Although their destination wasn't far, they once again arrived under cover of darkness, which was giving them a terrifying reputation, but to be honest was just causing difficulties for the expedition. Trying to ensure that an area was secure when you can barely see in front of you is no easy task. As enemies swarm from the buildings of the settlement, the scavenger takes point once more, looking to mow them down while they plink shots off its armoured front end. Looking to recreate the success of the last mission, Maisie hops out of the truck, looking to start blasting. Unfortunately this time she's a bit too eager, and jumps out right in front of an enemy combatant. The scavenger, currently preoccupied with other attackers, is unable to immediately cover her, so she ends up taking a bit of a beating from the attacker before Yuso eventually manages to train the scavenger's turret on the attacker and take them down. After the shooting has calmed down, Yuso and Nyx hop out of the scavenger to begin examining the area and tending to Maisie's wounds. Plastile is their primary goal, but it's a rare material so they don't expect to find... That was the thoughts running through Yuso's head, seconds before she wandered into what must have been a hospital, which was completely filled with hospital beds made almost entirely of plastile. Even before everything went to shit, this would have cost an ungodly amount of money for anyone. Never one to look a gift horse in the mouth, however, Yuso decides to accept this gift from the universe and starts dismantling the beds to reclaim the plastile. Although the scavenger has some light armour at the front, which does wonders for protecting the occupants, it's far from invulnerable, and as such usually requires a fair bit of repair work following each confrontation. As Maisie began to explore the camp, Nyx got to work patching up the damage from the attackers. After a bit of a snooze overnight, the expedition team get to work pulling apart anything of value. They're becoming quite skilled at the process, and make quick work of it. and in no time at all are packed up with a bunch of pemmican, components, steel, plastile, and even a few advanced components into the vehicles. Whilst trying to load the vehicle, a couple of local otters take exception to the group's presence and decide to try and attack them. But it turns out that otters don't compete too well with firearms. Inspired by the otters, however, a local boar also decides to try and take a chunk out of Nyx. It must not have seen the entirety of the altercation for the otters, however, as this ended the same way, but not before it was able to give Nyx some nasty scratches with its tusks. Back at the city, the flame turrets were ensuring that the team got to fall asleep to the calming lullaby of the infected screaming in agony. The next morning, the expedition crew finally had everything packed up, and they set off back for the city, eager of course to once again be surrounded by the sound of screaming infected. As seemed to be standard practice at this point, they arrived long after the sun had set, and retired to the comfort of their beds for the night. Thankfully, despite the late hour of their return, they were back in plenty of time to catch the last notes of the slowly burning infected's lullaby. Nyx starts the next morning strong, by finally putting together the multi-analyzer, letting Maisie continue her research into fabrication, and also letting her escape her responsibilities to the expedition team. She'd been happy to get out of the city, but the excitement had worn off after the hit she took from that attacker, and now she was quite looking forward to hiding away in the safety of her room once more. As a little gift to the group, and to celebrate their newfound resource abundance, Yuso put some of their resources toward building a TV in the dining hall, so that the group could enjoy some nice pre-recorded TV with their meals. The following day, the good news continued, as Annette informed the group that it was finally warm enough to begin planting crops outside again. The eastern courtyard had largely been taken over by infrastructure, but they were sure to plant some potatoes and rice there nonetheless, to ensure a little variety in their food supplies. With everything going well, the young Jubilee was starting to become a real optimist. A weird outcome for one growing up in an apocalypse, but Annette was just pleased to see her kids growing up happy. In fact, in the interest of promoting such happiness across the whole group, and also making the courtyard feel a little less industrial, Annette suggested planting a small field of daylilies, just to beautify the place a little. With her new facilities available, Maisie wasted no time launching straight back into her studies. She was even taking the time to explain some of her work to the kids while she went, hoping to inspire a desire to learn in them too. The group had done an excellent job of protecting the complex from the infected thus far, but they were conscious of the dangers in opening the garage door. It required someone to manually operate it, and although they'd been lucky so far, all it would take is for someone to open it whilst an angry infected was waiting outside for them to have a disaster on their hands. To minimise this risk, Nyx suggested adding some defences to the south of the complex, next to the garage door. These would take the form of another flamethrower turret and a CCTV camera. That way, the turret could deal with any rowdy infected, and the camera would let the group know if it was clear for them to open the door and head out. With Maisie, Yuso and Annette standing guard, Nyx was quick to throw up the embrasures to secure the new area. Adding the new defences also meant needing to run a wire from their power grid all the way over to that side of the complex, but they weren't short on steel anymore, and it would give them more options for how to handle any issues in the future if they had proper wiring all through the complex. With the weather warming up, the infected were becoming more active again, so it wasn't long before the new defences got a test run. In fact, all of the defences were soon very hard at work. Spring really did seem to be the most dangerous time, as all the infected began to thaw and start seeking out food. For almost 3 whole days and nights, the complex's defences are in a state of constant readiness, launching bullets and gouts of flame on a regular basis. On the fourth day, under the guise of wanting to collect more resources, but really just wanting to get away from all the burning flesh and screaming, the expedition crew head out once more, this time with Annette accompanying them in Maisie's stead, whilst Maisie stayed home to continue her research. The crew head off to an old hunting site out in the wilderness, hoping to find some more supplies that they can use. By some miracle, they actually arrived at this site during the day, so were actually able to see what they were doing when the residents inevitably decided to shoot first and ask questions later. Of course, shoot first was a contentious choice of words, given that the most advanced weaponry the residents seemed to possess was the bow and arrow. Whilst the scavenger carried on ahead, Annette parked up the truck and hopped out to provide supporting fire with her revolvers. They had the area secured in no time, and began picking through the ruins. To her surprise, Annette soon came across a psychic emanator in the ruins, a remarkably high-tech piece of kit for such a primitive group. Discussing it with Yuso, they figured that perhaps the residents had blamed technology for the current apocalypse, and as a result had locked away any of their advanced tech, favouring Neolithic living instead. With a shrug, they decided to take the emanator, which could be used to psychically improve people's moods back in the complex. Whilst the expedition crew spent the day ransacking the settlement, back at the complex another survivor showed up, looking to join the group. In keeping with their usual policy, Maisie took it upon herself to welcome Ghost into the complex, after a quick check for any signs of infection of course. Ghost seemed quite social, knew her way around farming, and thankfully unlike Shakan, wasn't afraid to handle a gun, even if she wasn't very good at it. Looking to give the group more options, Maisie began planning to add more doors to some of the buildings in the western courtyard, to let them expand their usable buildings, and allow them to set up a new bedroom for Ghost. When packing up the caravan to head back, the expedition crew elected not to take any of the human meat they'd found there, but having found it, they did let themselves feel a little bit better about mowing down the poorly equipped residents of the camp. What they did take was a load of pemmican, medicine, steel and plastile, as well as the psychic emanator. The expedition arrived back a little later that day, their return covered by a group of travellers who had already decided to set themselves up in the most bloody and gore-filled street in the city. And the street soon proves why it's covered in so much gore, as the travellers, along with some help from the complex's turrets, fend off encroaching infected. Immediately showcasing the helpfulness of wiring up more of the complex, the group decide to set Ghost up with a room in the newly wired section of the complex. Of course, as well as the infected, the group can't forget that this very planet seems to hate their existence, as a cold snap sets in on the area, immediately destroying their outdoor crops. This is especially concerning in light of their dwindling supply of mushrooms in the freezer. In order to combat this, they decide to turn one of the rooms on the west side of the complex into another mushroom grow room, tearing up the floors, adding heaters, and an airlock. To help support the additional heaters, they also add additional solar panels, although they should have plenty for anything that could possibly need in the future. As the group rush around the complex to try and solve the food issue, the cause becomes suddenly quite clear. The yak population has exploded over the course of the winter. Figuring they can tackle the issue from both ends by reducing the demand on their food supply, whilst also generating more food for themselves, the group elect to have a little cull of their yak population. With the yak meat likely to go off a lot quicker than the mushrooms, they decided it was also finally time to power their walk-in freezer, allowing it to be freezing even during the summertime. They also decided that outputting the heat from the freezer unit into the dining hall would help keep it warm in the process. It was all go in the complex, with Maisie researching, Yuso smelting, Ghost and Nyx working in the grow rooms, and the kids following it all with curiosity in their hearts. Later that night, Annette decided to ask each of the children a little more about their interests, to see where they may best fit within the group. Amelia had an interest in building things with her hands, and was always on the go. Connor meanwhile was an avid learner, having spent much time watching Maisie research her projects. Jubilee was a little bit more creative, enjoying making art and spending her time chatting away with anyone who would listen to her. With all the progress that they'd made in the complex, Maisie suggested that they all deserved a little more luxury, So she began working with Nix to plan out a proper plumbing system, allowing them to wash in sinks and warm showers, instead of a metal bucket on the ground. Although Annette had never given up hope that Skeldig was out there, it had been almost 3 years without any contact, and her hope was low. Shakan in the meantime had managed to woo Annette, and the two decided to try being together. Although we can't rule out that Shakan's primary motivation was being able to sleep in a real bed, instead of the sleeping bag she was still stuck in. But the group built the couple a double bed in Annette's room for them to share. That night, Maisie announced to the group she'd progressed her research, and was about ready to begin what she thought was going to be her biggest project yet, one that they were all very excited to see come to fruition. Good morning, afternoon or night, whichever it is, wherever you are, and thank you for watching my silly little video. I hope you enjoyed it. I am, as ever, already working on the next episode, so do be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to be notified of when that goes live. I'm also working on some non-Rimworld videos now too. Ooh. I've been wanting to try making videos on other games for a while now, primarily as an opportunity to learn more video editing skills, so that I can then hopefully improve those skills for other Rimworld videos as well. That said, any videos of any other games I make will be in addition to the Rimworld content, never instead of it, so I won't be doing any less Rimworld stuff even if I do start making videos on other things. I'm keeping the game in question a secret for the moment, but if you have any suggestions for other games you'd like to see me make videos on, please do let me know. I shall see you all again soon, but until then, I hope you're all keeping safe and looking after yourselves. Bye bye!